Greetings and blessings, YouTube. This is John the Jansenist, also known as my other account name, Hell's Unicorn. This particular evening, I'm actually going to be delving into a topic that has a good deal of overlap between the various subjects covered on both this channel and the other channel, which is relative based on which video you're watching, since I'm going to be uploading this video onto both channels. Since I am right now predicting that this video will go past the 15-minute mark that is normally allotted for lesser channels, this video will be broken up into a couple of parts on the John the Jansenist channel, and it will be in one bulk video here on the Hell's Unicorn channel. I received a private message from a longtime friend and fellow user here on YouTube by the name of Macaro Guy, and he sent me a link to an article that's actually on Lew Rockwell, which is a news site that I visit very regularly. But this is one that actually slipped past my attention, in part because at the time that the video was, the message was actually sent to me, I was actually indisposed with some other stuff going on. But now that all of that has been cleared away, I will now get into this. I'm going to basically read through this article. I'm going to provide some brief commentary in between certain segments of the article where I have either things to add or things that I actually out and out disagree with. The author in question is Christopher Mannion, who is one of several Roman Catholic affiliates of the Lew Rockwell site and one of many obvious Roman Catholic members of the Libertarian and/or Liberty movement. As many of you may know, I am a former communicant member of the Roman Church. I ceased communion with them back in 2007 after a series of personal events that caused me to re-examine not only my own faith, but the doctrines of the Church, and I have found many of them to be in error, to be inconsistent with the traditions of the earliest members of the Church, and logic would tend to command that in any particular faith, the earlier in the succession of the tradition, the more likely you are to get an accurate picture of things. So, to give just a brief sum up of this article before I delve into it, Christopher Mannion is arguing that there is a problem with the Ron Paul campaign as it relates to Roman Catholic voters. And he argues that the problem is more on the Roman Catholic side than it is on Ron Paul's actual ideological stances. On that point, I agree with Christopher Mannion. Where I disagree with him is on the nature of the problem that the Roman Catholic Church has, and why I would argue that not just Ron Paul, but America in general has a Roman Catholic problem. And I'll lay that out in between the little intercessions that I make here in this article. And now I'm going to start reading this. There is a link for this in the description as well. There are millions of traditional Christian conservatives who have not bought into the Washington culture of the Beltway trough. Many of them embrace Ron Paul's intrepid demands for serious cuts in the size, budget, and power of government. Many more cheer Dr. Paul's drive to end the Fed-driven theft by inflation. In fact, that effort appeals to members of many denominations who honor the commandment, "Thou shalt not steal." Of course, many, but not all Christians who embrace radical dispensationalism have a different set of priorities. They desire Armageddon. I'm going to stop right there. The term radical dispensationalism is an unnecessary redundancy, and it gives a very false picture of what exactly dispensationalism is. For those of you who don't know, dispensationalism is a view of the Bible that states that there are two separate co-equal covenants, one made in the New Testament to the Gentiles and one that is still in effect in the Old Testament for the Jews and for the nation-state of Israel. This is a view of theology that I do not embrace because it runs counter to more than 1,800 years of established Christian dogma, both before and after the Reformation. And all parties were in agreement on this point up until the late 19th century. To anyone who is familiar with this ideology, I will simply state the following. If you have the viewpoint that there is a rapture before the tribulation and that it is near at hand and that it will take a certain shape or form that is conducive to the lunacy that is pushed by Harold Camping or John Hagee, the word radical goes without saying because it leads to a radical ideology that is rabidly pro-Israel no matter what. These people regularly excuse the abuses committed in the name of Israel either by this country or by that country. The law of God is a very important thing unless as it applies to the abuses that Israel commits in the name of its alleged defense. For anyone who is a lover of the law of God and who believes that they are elect in Christ, you cannot be a dispensationalist and be a Christian, in my opinion, and in the opinion of just about every one of the early church fathers of the Christian faith, and in the case of the scriptures as well. But anyway, I'm going to get off the soapbox there and get back to what I was talking about here before, which was reading this article. Their millennial passion disposes them to support candidates who advocate expanding the wars in the Middle East in order to bring on the second coming of Christ. Yes, this I agree with. Which will apparently inaugurate his 1,000-year reign, which they will then share with him. These voters are not inconsequential in number and influence. In 2008, for instance, both Huckabee and McCain slavishly sought the blessing of Pastor John Hagee of San Antonio's Cornerstone Church, the founder and leader of Christians United for Israel. Hagee finally endorsed McCain, only to find McCain denouncing the endorsement because Hagee's long history of anti-Catholicism. Which brings us to the Catholics. The Catholic faith does not applaud Armageddon or urge its early arrival. I would state just right here in regards to this that Armageddon is an unavoidable prophetic occurrence. At some point in time, the world is going to end. All things that have a beginning have an end. I don't applaud people who try to bring about Armageddon through acts of wickedness. Nevertheless, if it's in God's plan, there's no way that we should be treating it in any negative fashion, provided that it is actually God's plan. But anyway, continuing. Of course, we pray thy kingdom come, but we do not pretend to know the day or the hour. This is a little bit of better language here. As far as Israel is concerned, Catholics believe that the Catholic Church, and not any specific ethnic group or geographic territory, is the new Israel. I agree with this also. However, the Roman system is at odds with the original understanding of Catholicism, and that's why I am not in communion with them. Continuing. So why aren't Catholic leaders inclined to applaud and even zealously support Ron Paul, not only for his fiscal honesty, but for his opposition to abortion and Roe v. Wade? I would like to add right here that Ron Paul's fiscal honesty is actually part of the problem that Rome has with him. But continuing on. Sure, dispensationalists might oppose him because of his condemnation of Bush-Obama's illegal wars, but Catholics have no similar theological calling to do so. In fact, they have good reason to resonate that condemnation. So what's Ron Paul's Catholic problem? When offered this pro-life constitutionalist who reflects the moral views of millions of Catholics, why do prominent Catholics follow the lead of the secular liberal media and treat Dr. Paul like the 13th floor of a hotel? I think a great deal of the problem lies not with the people in the pews, but with professional Catholics who have put their faith in the Republican Party, specifically with the GOP establishment left behind by George W. Bush. Specifically, many people among the establishment's Catholic faction are closely identified with the Iraq War and to this day long to vindicate their support of it. These self-appointed professional Catholics do not represent all the faithful, of course. Congressman Walter Jones of North Carolina, of Freedom Fries fame, was honest enough to say publicly what many Republicans thought privately. The Iraq War was a mistake, and he said so, admitting that he was wrong to support it. Nor does it include all pro-lifers. Yes, after watching Obama's strident support of abortion and gay marriage, many Catholics believe that the Republican Party is their only hope, but "put not your hope in princes" certainly rings true here. The GOP has used, abused, and betrayed pro-lifers for decades. The problem rests with a small group of Catholics chosen and cultivated by Karl Rove, who were given entry to the White House early on in Bush's presidency. With their help, Rove traveled the country speaking to leaders of various interest groups that he identified and assiduously cultivated. In one city after another, he would meet with pro-life, pro-family groups on one floor of a hotel, and then went upstairs to meet with another group that supported the government of Israel. For Rove, getting Catholics to support the war was a high priority, while there were no parallel efforts on the other side. And let me just stop right here. While I will concur that Karl Rove has a lot of blame in shifting what little actual pro-free market, pro-smaller government Catholic contingent there is in this country in favor of the neoconservative position, I argue that this is largely a minority position, and when you look at the Roman Catholic Church's traditional view of social justice, the problem with Ron Paul in their eyes is not that he's anti-war and that he's pro-life. The problem is that he is pro-free market and basically pro-freedom. That kind of runs contrary to the Roman notion of social justice, and I'll get into this a bit later after the article's concluded. Well, that is except for Pope John Paul II and Cardinal Joseph Ratzinger, later to become Pope Benedict, both of whom profoundly opposed the U.S. invasion and occupation of Iraq. At Pope John Paul's beatification this past May 1st, his closest friend and confidant, Cardinal Deut, described how the Pope expressed real anger only twice in his reign, condemning the mafia in southern Italy and condemning the U.S. invasion of Iraq. Pity poor Jim Nicholson, the Catholic who Bush appointed as his envoy to the Holy See, whose job it was to sell Bush's war to a pope who opposed it so strongly. Other Catholic neocons like George Weigel, Michael Novak, Father Richard Niehaus, and William McGurn also fervently supported the war in any way they could. In a way, their support was somehow ironic. The Iraq War kicked to the back burner all efforts to advance the pro-life, pro-family cause. Attorney General John Ashcroft, one of the most ardent defenders of the family ever to hold that position, once told me, when I lived next door to him, that the war on terror was his first priority, and he never got to address other pro-family priorities like abortion and internet obscenity. While Bush would have lost both the elections in 2000 and 2004 without support from pro-life Catholics, he brought into his inner circle only pro-war Catholics. They did their best to give the war a Catholic imprimatur, concocting an upside-down version of just war theory twisted to justify the unjustifiable, preemptive war. They threw 1,500 years of just war tradition down the memory hole, but that is the neocon dialectic at work. Nothing is true forever, and after all, 9/11 changed everything. One of the most disingenuous of these depredations came from William McGurn, who left his post as chief editor at the Wall Street Journal to work as Bush's chief speechwriter, and later returned to News Corp as Rupert Murdoch's speechwriter. In 2007, when Pope Benedict visited the White House, McGurn used his journal column to announce that Pope Benedict had somehow changed his mind and now actually supported the war in Iraq. I recently asked him about that at a Washington function. The usual loquacious wordsmith roared, "I don't want to talk about it," and turned on his heel. An uncommon reaction for a celebrated conservative who is a frequent speaker on the Catholic circuit. In sum, a small group of professional Catholic apologists for President Bush pushed the war to the front burner, leaving serious issues like abortion, internet obscenity, and other issues important to the indispensable pro-family coalitions to gather dust. During the 2004 campaign, Rove admitted as much and promised pro-family leaders that after the election, their issues would finally get attention. But that never really came to pass. The endless disastrous conduct of the war virtually blocked them out. And no, Karl Rove never apologized. A specific and troubling vector has emerged in the crusade for secular democracy on the part of professional Christians, including Catholics. They virtually ignore the persecution, killing, forced emigration of Christians from Iraq caused by the Iraq War. Curiously, President Bush, who many hailed as a good Christian, did not manifest any interest in the plight of Iraqi Christians, their pastors, their families, or their churches.